Now, it's important for us to recognize that the teaching methods that were used in the early Islamic institutions were probably some of the most progressive methods that were used throughout the world. Quite often we've been given this view of education in the Muslim world as archaic, as somehow behind the times, so to speak. But when we really examine that history, when we strip away the influence of colonialism and the domination of other cultures, in Muslim lands, what we find is a very progressive set of educational methods. Teaching methods in the Islamic educational system depended upon the age of the students. For younger students, more attention was given to student attitudes and individual differences. While rote memorization was used, approaches such as reading aloud, reading stories about historical figures and events, and learning through play were all used by Muslim teachers. Teachers also gave advice and direction, served as role models, and attempted to balance motivation and punishment as ways of dealing with students. Approaches to teaching older students included discussion, dialogue, lectures, and debates. Again, this is critical. Quite often our view of education in Muslim lands strictly focuses on rote memorization. As we can see, though, from a historical standpoint, many methods were used, and most of these methods had to do with the age appropriateness of their use. What age group were they being used with? So there was a clear understanding on the part of these early Muslim educators that education had to be based on the needs of the child. You cannot teach a 12 or 13-year-old child the same way you teach a 4 or 5-year-old child. Those methods have to change. So what is this historical legacy? The history of Islamic education reflects a transition from the simple halaqah, which focused on religious knowledge and was housed in the masjid or the mosque, to complex institutions such as universities and public schools, institutions which taught both the religious and the so-called secular subjects. Education was available to all Muslims, irrespective of race, ethnicity, or national origin, and it served as a major force in civilizing the various Muslim peoples across the earth. So that's the historical legacy. That tells us a little bit about what Muslims were doing in those early years of the Ummah, the transitions that were made. Now, those early institutions looked at Islamic education, obviously in terms of its roots in the Quran and the Sunnah. There were certain concepts that were highlighted, certain perspectives, certain meanings. And as we begin to define Islamic education, we want to take a look at three concepts that really, in a sense, kind of serve as a foundation for Islamic education. These concepts are ta'lim, ta'dib, and tarbiyah. Now, ta'lim, from the root alama, to know, to be aware, to perceive, or to learn, denotes knowledge being sought or imparted through instruction and learning. So again, we can look at this as a sense the process of education, the imparting of knowledge through instruction and learning. Ta'deeb, from the root aduba, to be cultured, refined, well-mannered. It implies the development of proper social behavior. Quite often when we think of education in the strictly Western sense, the whole notion of adab or tadib has no place. We really don't even think about it. The whole notion of manners, refinement, being cultured, the development of proper social behavior. And finally, tarbiyah has been defined as causing something to develop from stage to stage until reaching its completion or full potential. This implies that there is something, the fitra or intrinsic nature, already existing within the child, already exists within the child, and that education is a process of unfolding and bringing out more than a process of instilling and pouring in. And this is, again, something extremely important to recognize from the standpoint of Islamic approaches to education, Islamic teaching methodology. What is it that we're trying to do? Are we trying to pour knowledge in to a child or a young person? Or are we trying to pull something out that already exists? How we answer that question quite often will determine the attitude that we take, the methodology that we use. Again, from an Islamic standpoint, we know that the child is born Muslim, born in a state of fitra, submission to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is the environment that turns him or her in another direction, into something else other than a Muslim. Quite often that environment includes child rearing practices, educational practices, practices that serve to harm the child's self-esteem, harm the child's motivation to learn, and take them down a path that ultimately leads away from Islam. Now let's go into some definitions of Islamic education. It's important that we define this term Islamic education, because ultimately Muslims are going to have to be on the same page in terms of providing high quality Islamic education, particularly here in the West, but I would argue that globally this has to be the case. We're going to have to be on the same page in terms of how we define Islamic education. Let's look at Ghulam Sarwar's definition from 1980. He says that, quote, Islamic education may be defined as a system which transmits the revealed and acquired knowledge to the younger generation of Muslims in order to prepare them for life and enable them to discharge their duties as Khalifa or Vice-Regent or Agent of Allah on this earth, with the sole aim of achieving success here and here in the hereafter. So again, let's look at the key concepts here. System. First of all, system, methodology, transmits the revealed and acquired knowledge. He's making that distinction much the same way as those earlier Muslims made those distinctions. Revealed, acquired knowledge to the younger generation of Muslims in order to prepare them for life. So we're talking about a preparation process. We're talking about an objective being the preparation of a younger generation, the next generation. So you see the intergenerational quality here, the intergenerational dimension. And prepare them for life, enable them to discharge their duties as the Khalifa of Allah on this earth, with the sole aim of achieving success here and in the hereafter. So there's a dual purpose of Islamic education: to prepare young people, to prepare the next generation for success both in this life and in the hereafter.